So I guess we could get started.
Why don't we introduce us? I want you to start, Laura, and we'll just go around. Or I can start.
I can start.
Okay. Go ahead.
Laura Kayakon, the Adult Services Librarian here in Sturgeon Bay.
And I'm Marcia Kritzler Eglund, and I'm the child of a Holocaust survivor.
I'm John Harris. I'm a retired professor from UW Green Bay, and I love history. I'm not a history professor. I just, it has been my avocation or my passion since I've been about 20 years old. And a number of people here have been to these art history book discussions in the past. And so it's good to be with you here. I'm from Sturgeon Bay, been here since 1986.
Wow. I'm Beth Locken. I am the Youth Services Librarian here in the building, and Mouse was the first graphic novel I bought for this building.
Really?
Yes, it is.
When was that?
Oh, that was 1999.
Okay.
Yes, so when I got here, I asked to create a graphic novel collection. And the director at the time said yes, but insisted that I read every single thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that was very, very cutting edge at the time. Most places did not have graphic novel stuff. And this is one of the first ones that I bought because the library that I had been in before, where I had worked with teenagers, this had been one of the books that we had, and I knew that prize winners belong in the library.
Right.
And it's a prize winner, 1992.
Mhm.
Sort of hard to beat a Pulitzer.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going to start off and say a few words about the book, and then we'll just turn it to everyone else. Here's the way I'm going to introduce it. I'm going to go back to 1982. And in 1982, I read a very, very powerful book called Sophie's Choice by William Styron. And wow, that moved me. And a couple of years later, I read another book about the Holocaust, and that was called. The movie was called Sophie's Choice. Was called Schindler's List.
Yeah.
The book was called Schindler's Ark. Another powerful, dark book, but good book too, because it saves so many people. And then I read this book. And for me, this book is as powerful as Sophie's Choice and Schindler's List. It is dark. It is emotional, wrenching at times. I guess when you write about the Holocaust, one would expect that. But also the relationship between Artie and his father was emotional and dark and wrenching at times. And I know the book, as you well know, travels from the present to the past. And there were times when I was in the past, say, I got to get out of here. Too much. And so you would come back to the present, but then that would get very emotional too. And in the Artie's interviewing his father with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth the whole time in the book, which captures him, by the way. He was essentially still smoking, I believe. He's vaping now, but I've seen him interviewed a number of times. So there's a cigarette there, so it's interesting. A note I wrote here was that I say this graphic novel portrays the horrors of the Holocaust, and really, it does. There was one scene in there where it just wore me down, and that's when Artie's older brother, at age 5 or 6, was with an aunt, and they were going to the aunt felt they were going to Auschwitz, and so she poisoned Artie's brother, her 2 kids, and then poisoned herself. Wow. I can't imagine. I can't imagine that. I just can't imagine it. I thought the theme here, I might be dead wrong on this, but I'll throw it out now and then later on we can talk about it. I think a major, besides the horrors of the Holocaust, I think a major theme in this book is guilt. I think it's with Artie's father, it's survivor's guilt. And I've known some people who've gone through really difficult times where other people have died. They sort of hold that in common. They sit and wonder why they didn't die or they didn't have those bad things happen to them. And I think there's also guilt on Artie's part. See, when he wrote this book, he hadn't been in touch with his father for 2 years. And then back in the 70s, he decided to make contact and started interviewing his father. And of course, what came out is this. But that relationship between father and son, I thought was very interesting. I think there was guilt as part of it. Like I say, I might be wrong there. But that's sort of my take on it. A few more words and I'll be done. Just a few words about Art Spiegelman. He's 1 year younger than I am. So he was very, very influenced by Mad magazine. And I really remember Mad
Oh, yeah.
magazine. And he was writing comic strips as a 12-year-old. He's been doing this almost his whole life. By the time he was 18, he's on the streets hawking his comic strips. I used to chew bubble gum from Tops, and that's where he worked for 20 years. So they used to have little cartoons in there and things like that. He worked 13 years on this in the other book, 13 years. It was serialized in a thing called Raw. And then about in 86 or something like that, I think is when they put it into a book. When he was 20 years old, he had a psychological breakdown. Interesting, and he was hospitalized for about a month, I believe. The word is out he was doing a lot of LSD at the time. And certainly in 68 LSD, I was on campus. Now I didn't do LSD, but it was all around down at UW-Madison, all over. Kids are talking about tripping out. It's very, very common. And of course, that's the same year that his mother, her was Anna in the book. She's her regular name is Anja, and she took her life in 1968. And I imagine you don't forget the horrors that you lived through. And you might try to stuff it, but those horrors don't stay stuffed. And they can cause damage. And I'm no psychiatrist, but I'm saying if you look at her taking her life in 1968, I'd say her experience, losing her son, the whole experience, ending up in Auschwitz with her husband. Well, one last word. At the beginning of the war, there were 85 Spiegelmans over in Poland, I imagine Germany, like 85. 72 of them did not survive. 72 were lost to that war and lost to the concentration camp. That's almost. I can't even find the words to describe what that must have been like. Wow. That's my introduction to this book. You can tell I've been moved by this book. I was really, really moved. And So I wonder if, I'm gonna start off with this question. Were you people moved? And if so, in what way? Who wants to jump and help me out there?
I have a question for you. When did you first read it? Did you read it when it first came out?
Nope. I read this a month ago.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
He walked in the library and by luck, there was a copy. that I handed to
Okay.
him.
Yeah.
Because I too, I missed this whole book, I didn't know a thing about it when it got the Pulitzer Prize or whatever, but I
No, I
just
didn't.
read it this last month myself.
Yeah. How did you react to it? Viscerally or?
Well, at first I was taken, I thought a graphic novel, come on.
Yeah.
But, I started reading it and the approach with the father and the son and the dialogue, I thought was so real. The son in his relationship with his father, and I read the second volume of it. I didn't read the first, but I thought it was so well done because yes, there was the horrors of the concentration camp, but then there was the father-son relationship. And then there was how amazingly the survival techniques that the father had, his ability to become a tutor or be a tinsmith or whatever he needed to do to survive. I thought that was amazing. I thought it was an amazing story, and too, I was very touched by it.
Yeah. I was very touched by his father, Vladik. He had what's called emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Where you
Yes.
connect to people on an emotional level. Man, he was so way up there. And of course, his survival skills were unbelievable. And you would say, well, where did that come from? Because you see, his wife came from Artie's father's wife came from a very wealthy family. And that money then worked its way to where Artie's father opened his own factory prior to the war. So that's his sort of his background, his training, you know what I mean? And then that's you're talking about his survival instincts and the steps he takes. And wow, I think he had to learn that on the sort of, I'm a musician, sometimes you play things by ear. He had to learn things by ear.
Yeah.
Also, other people have their responses.
I thought I would share a little bit about young people. You were talking about like reactions to the book. I just retired a couple of years ago and I taught 8th graders language arts, and then I had an American history class. And in Illinois, teaching the Holocaust is mandated. I never could understand, there is no way to really teach the Holocaust. Only I could open up a few windows for students so that they could examine things. I don't really know that there is a such thing as teaching it. Anne Frank, visit to the Holocaust Museum and so forth. But we did have different groups that could pick different books. Mouse was one of the books that was available for our students. So we would have a small group of maybe 6 or 7 of the students in the class that would have that. And certainly maybe the less articulate students, the ones who didn't read as much, oh, this is going to be a graphic novel. This is going to be really easy for me. Oh, I'm just going to like buzz through this. This is going to take care of my grade, whatever. Okay, so for whatever reason, that's the book that the student picked. So we have quiet reading like daily, and the students were bringing their books. And I'm watching as I'm reading, and I am telling you that those students, like touching the pictures or staring at them or slowly turning as they were looking at the graphic novel, and probably got more out of that than reading. Well, we did night together, but what I'm saying is that I think that just brought so much to so many more students who might have just blown off whatever I'm going to do. Then they pass the book to somebody else and they say, look at the picture or look at this, caption underneath there, so forth. So I thought it was a great experience overall, but especially for students who just needed something and happened to be an eye opener for them. There's been so much controversy over the book, and that's something I hope we'll talk about. But I didn't see it where I was. I thought it was just a great eye opener and a window for all kinds of students to experience this a little bit differently, maybe remember something that they might not have otherwise. So,
Yeah, the book was just intended to see in
Yeah.
February.
It was what?
It was banned.
Yeah,
Banned by the
what's-
Tennessee.
McMinnis County,
Oh, Tennessee.
McMinnis
Okay,
County
got it.
School
Well,
Board.
Is that around Murfreesboro by any chance?
I'm not, no, no, I think it's closer to Chattanooga.
Oh.
Okay, which is not, that's not far from Murfreesboro.
Oh, okay.
That's on one side of the
Yeah.
map. Yeah, anyways.
Oh, yeah, because Chattanooga is just down the interstate.
Yeah.
That's right. So, yeah.
Yeah, but it was banned and for two reasons.
Please tell us.
Please,
Yeah, I had taken some notes about it.
one, I think it was in the second book. I just read the first book. There were some dead, naked people in a tub.
Yeah, and
And the other, go
they
ahead.
talked about the nudity and, there was a scene with a woman, which was actually his mother.
In the bathtub. right?
Yeah, and they took things out of context.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nudity. Oh, they used the word bitch. And, there's hangings and people committing suicide, and we shouldn't
Expose our kids
kids
to
to
that.
this.
They lynch
In the South,
minorities
yeah.
in the South. Hello.
Yeah,
And like,
Hello,
these kids
hello,
haven't-
hello,
These
yeah.
kids haven't heard these words. This is.
yeah, that's
this is-
just,
If things like this could happen to a child, and they did,
yeah.
Yeah.
children in middle school are old enough to
Exa-
know about it.
Exactly,
And should know
exactly.
about it.
And I'll say, going to high school in the late 60s, early 70s, John and I both talked about this. Does anyone remember being shown films of the concentration camps? We were all brought into the auditorium and they showed
Yes.
these long films trying to let us know what this should never happen again. So that's a much different sort of approach to this novel.
Yeah.
And Terry's was in my class, so she remembers also.
Well, I remember reading Hiroshima, I think in 8th grade, and that, I don't recall if it was required. As I read Mouse, I kept thinking, why was this banned? I just don't understand. What's so different about this? I loved that they used the characters of mice and cats. And then masking their faces with pig masks. I thought that was really clever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the animals I wrote down, the Jewish people were mice, Germans were cats, Poles were pigs, French were frogs, Americans were dogs, and the Swedish were deer. And one question I came across was, how did he make these animals expressive of human emotions? And when I looked at some of the pictures, it seems like the eyes make a huge difference. The eyes, the eyebrows are pointing in different directions. If anyone's interested, I took a few of these. That's how we really did
Pass
it.
those down, Laura.
Yeah.
I got online and I kept running into interviews of Art Spiegelman. And there was one interview where I then began to understand why it took him so many years to do this. When he calls, a panel and they're very small. He didn't do real big ones and shrink them down. They're all little ones. And he talked about all the details that he had to put into one little panel. And it was astounding. I mean, just like it's an art form to get all that stuff. So you look at any one panel and you look at detail, what's there.
Yeah.
Look, it's just astounding,
Yeah.
really.
So this particular piece of art
Yeah,
This particular piece of art was the very first time a graphic novel won the Pulitzer.
yep.
And this was the watershed book that made graphic novels be considered as serious literature. This was the proof that a graphic novel could be serious prize-winning literature. It wasn't little kid stuff.
Mhm.
It wasn't, the detective comics. This wasn't comics. This was a novel. And this is the first time that that happened. And it broke ground for so many fantastic things that have come since then. But this, when I read this thing, I sat there and my stomach hurt. I sat there
I love it.
and my stomach hurt and I cried and I shuddered because this, as much as the film footage that they took when they liberated the camps, this made this incredibly real. Now, the image that they talk about with the pile of naked bodies, okay, that is the same picture as we saw when they liberated the camps and they walked over to the pits filled with naked humans,
Mhm.
skeletal naked humans. And the fact that some of the little characters in here were naked males and you could see tiny little mousy penises, that's not the horrific thing.
Yeah.
The horrific thing was that there were a pile of dead bodies.
That's right.
When you first introduced the book, you introduced the book here, tell me about the response you got.
I put it in the adult section. I did not put it in the teen section
Mhm.
because I thought at the time I didn't have any graphic novels for teens.
Yeah.
And I tend, when I'm deciding where a graphic novel is going to go in this building, I kind of think of it the way I would think of a movie. So in the teen section, it's PG-13-ish. And anything that would get an R-rated movie goes into the adult section.
Okay.
And I think that Holocaust stuff is probably an R. Everything is always available to anyone who wants to touch it. But the content of this says to me that this is something that you should be aware that the content is graphic. The content is serious. And it's not something I'd put in the children's department. It is something that is, it's a serious thing.
Mhm.
They don't, the children's books that I have about the Holocaust don't have the truly graphic pictures. The elementary school introduction doesn't have the truly graphic pictures of what's going on. And it doesn't really talk about the psychological toll that happens. And our nonfiction the teen nonfiction is mixed in with the adult nonfiction. So when I looked at this, I said, this is nonfiction and it's not for small children. So it's going to go into the adult section. And I didn't have any pushback at all about having Mouse and Mouse 2 in the adult section.
But I can understand why Tennessee is banning this. I mean, I can totally understand. I
Tell
mean,
us more.
well,
Yeah.
there's a culture in the United States, and that culture denies that the Holocaust ever took place. So why would they not object to this?
Oh, I see. Right.
I mean, you have it. I don't mean, well, I'm going to get a little political, but you have a certain elements of our
free.
country that are denying this. Why would they then put that book in their library? I mean, based on, of course, they can use the excuse nudity. They can use any excuse they want to ban this. I've been to Auschwitz-Birkenau. I've been to a camp in the Czech Republic. This happened. This is real. And, but I get it. I can I have family who live in the South. I cannot discuss politics with them. I cannot discuss religion with them because they feel very differently than I do about a lot of things. And the Southern culture in some states, it's very conservative, and this is not anything they would accept.
That they would want their kids to learn about.
Well, and this is going beyond McMinn County. The state of
sure.
Tennessee
Yeah.
has bills in the legislature.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's not just Tennessee.
No.
It's
That's
all
my
over the
question.
country.
Like,
Okay.
Are you aware, are there other states?
I'm
I
sure
have
Texas is
questions
probably one.
for the elementary, I have questions for the teachers who taught kids in up, not high school age, but anybody who
Okay.
taught younger kids. Okay, I was reading an article about this subject not terribly long ago, and somebody brought up a point that just came pretty hard at me. When you pull first person narratives out of the school because they are too graphic, and that's what this is.
Mhm.
This is somebody who went through it talking about it. When you pull night out, when you pull the actual people who lived through this in their own voices talking about what happened, when you pull those things out, what replaces them? And what replaces them, because we're teaching the Holocaust, is garbage like the boy in the striped pajamas.
Yeah.
Okay. And I refused to buy the boy in the striped pajamas because I did not think that it belonged here. And so I didn't buy it. And it's available in other parts, but not in this building. It isn't. And the reason that it's so damaging. Did anybody read that book?
Oh, yeah.
Did anybody
And then they
see
saw
that
the
movie?
film.
Okay, okay. What
Boy
they,
in the striped
the
pajama.
boy in the striped pajamas, what they did when they made that, when he wrote that book, was it's from the standpoint of a Nazi, and it makes them into the victims. Oh my
Man.
God.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
have to look at that thing.
You're absolutely
You
right.
know, what are we doing here? Replacing that then, oh, that's a Holocaust book. No, it's not. It's a Nazi apologist book. And
By the way, they made it into a movie.
oh, yes, because it was so popular. And because,
Mhm.
yeah, so when you replace first person narrative with a story that makes the, let's be honest, horribly bad guys into sympathetic characters. Oh my goodness. The boy had no idea he was living next to a concentration camp. He had no idea what his father was up to. And his father really was very sympathetic. Just, even though he was the commandant of the camp, he was a very sympathetic character.
Yeah.
No.
Was this book banned before today?
This book?
Yeah.
Well,
Do you think it was banned in the schools, or
I-
it seems it was used a lot in the schools?
yeah, I think
is it
that it hasn't current. I think that it has been challenged in places, but this is the first time that it's actually been banned.
So is it the current trend right now to ban everything?
Yes.
Yeah.
There was,
Well, this is part of a large thing. I cut you off.
well, I was going to say, if you go to the American Library Association website, they have their list of banned books,
Mhm.
but they also, if there is a book challenge, the ALA is there to help. And say a year ago,
Mhm.
there was one challenge. This year, there have been 350 books challenged.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's all
Yeah.
going through, there are a number of conservative groups
Mhm.
that have their agenda. And an article I was reading in the New York Times said that basically what they're doing is their idea is that the lefties, liberal, I love this, woke socialists, are putting their agenda in front of our children. And we don't want that. And they think this is part of a liberal agenda. So they do whatever they can to get it out of the curriculum. But what are they doing? They're replacing it with their agenda.
Yeah.
And the governor of Tennessee has given the okay for 35 new charter schools that teach a curriculum to develop American patriots, which is code,
Yeah.
for the conservative agenda.
Let
And
me piggyback
Yeah.
on what you're saying. I spend my wife and I spend our winters in Florida. And Ron DeSantis is the governor.
Oh, boy.
And what you're describing in Tennessee, I think is magnified
Yeah.
fivefold.
oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And what's going on there. And a lot of it has to do with CRT, critical race theory.
Well, and
And what-
anti-Semitism, that falls right in.
It falls
Yeah.
into it.
That's part of this. Let's put it on the table.
Yep.
It's blatant.
Yeah. And then to me, what's so scary in society is those beliefs that are held by white supremacists are now becoming mainlined into certain political
Mhm.
parties, certain political factions in this country. It's just hard to believe it's happening in our country. I just,
In one interview, Spiegelman said, McMinn County would rather, quote, teach a nicer Holocaust.
a
A nicer Holocaust.
yeah,
Acceptable, an acceptable Holocaust.
Maybe only 600,000
Really, yeah.
victims rather than 6 million or something.
And it's more than 6 million. There are graves. I've read articles. There are graves all through
Mhm.
Europe, Eastern Europe, that will never find massive graves
Yeah.
of Jews that were killed. And it's not just Jews. It's
The Roma.
it's
and-
homosexuals, it's the Romas, it's
Yep.
any political
Handicapped
dissenter.
people.
But the
Yeah.
estimate is way more than 6 million.
Yeah.
But they'll never find the graves at this point.
Could you talk a little bit about going on to Mouse 2? Did he reach I'm a little fuzzy on it. Did he reach a claim for the book and then decide, I need a sequel? He already had a second part of it into the works? Were people like Adam, like you need to do another story, or how did it come about that he did it?
I wish I knew the answer
Yeah,
to
I
that.
don't know.
Well,
I can guess pretty,
Yeah.
you might know.
well, when they did not come out, they came out separate from each other.
Right,
Right.
several years ago.
But when you stop at they're headed into Auschwitz,
Mhm.
that
That's the end of
begs
this
a
book.
difference. Yeah. So if I was a betting woman, I would say that he already had quite a bit, because if it took him 12 years to write this, it wasn't 2 years between this one and the second
It
book.
was about 5 years, I think.
Yeah.
Was it? Okay.
It was just a few years. And so he probably had the rest of it in the pipeline and talking and doing. You hit that point and you see if somebody will pay to have the second book. So, that's, he can't have just said, and I'll finish at this point. This
Yeah.
was a good stopping point.
That makes sense, yeah.
Mhm.
Marcia, can you tell us something about your mother's experience?
Sure. My mother's was a little different because as a 9.5-year-old, her parents saw what was coming. They couldn't afford to escape as a family. So in 1938, they put my mother on a train and said goodbye to her and sent her into France. My mother never, for the longest time, after she started talking about this, kept saying, well, I'm not really a survivor. And I said, why do you say that? And she said, well, but I wasn't in a camp. I said, Mom, you were a young child. You were sent away from your family. You lost your education. You lost family. You lived on the run, basically, in these two children's homes, and then escaping from France into Spain and then Portugal and eventually the United States. You lost your childhood. You lost everything. I mean, if you've come to my talk, I have my mother's suitcase. Everything she owned was in this little cardboard suitcase. She never knew when she would see her parents again, if she would see them again. And 2.5 years later, she did. They were on a train platform and she was on a train heading through the Pyrenees, French Pyrenees, into Spain. And she saw them for 5 minutes and never saw them again. And shortly after that, they were transported to Drancy, which was a transit camp outside of Paris, and then placed on another train and sent to Auschwitz. And my grandmother was 42 years old, and she was murdered in the gas chambers when she got off of the train. My grandfather labored, and until he couldn't anymore, he probably died of typhus or dysentery. But if you go to Auschwitz, it's incredibly moving. And when I went there, there's just, you see, if you watch Schindler's List, you saw that one set of rails that comes into the camp. And I stood inside on the rails, and a friend took a picture of me. And it wasn't until I got home and I looked at the picture and I thought, I'm standing approximately in the last place that my grandparents stood. They got off this train in here.
Wow.
But it didn't hit me when I was standing there, but it did later. It's a very powerful place. And when my mother last saw her parents, they told her she was going on an adventure. She was 12 and a half then, 12. And she had, they were only taking children under the age of 12. And the day after her ship left, she turned 12. So, it's just, it could have worked out differently and I wouldn't be here with all of
We
you.
call it Bashert.
Bashert,
meant to be.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Bashert.
Bashert. And
It was meant to be.
it's just, and then finally she said, okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I am. My uncle, her older brother, survived several camps. And his wife, my Aunt Malvina, was from Hungary. And she and her sisters survived, but my aunt in particular had severe emotional problems and spent a year in a mental institution, but never was really right. But how can you be after because there were horrible things that were done to her. And the fact that she survived, and she realized that, you know, I have these problems and I need help. Because my experience with survivors, because I was in an area where there are a lot of Jewish families and a lot of new Americans. They were survivors who ended up in Kansas City. And they had their own club. And for a long time, it was called the New Americans Club. And they met together, they did all kinds of things together. But all of us kids who were children of survivors had similar experiences with our parents, whether they talked about their experiences or not. The way that they took care of us, the way that they disciplined us was very different from the other Jewish kids whose parents were born in the States and
American Jews.
yeah, and or our Christian friends, you know, and a lot of people just, you know, you don't understand it if you haven't lived it. But yeah, it was a very interesting childhood.
No,
Well, and the resources weren't there
Right.
for that generation.
No.
My father was born in this country, but he was a medic
Mhm.
and he treated the men and some women, of course, coming back from D-Day.
Mhm.
But the resources weren't there
No.
for that generation,
And,
the
and-
greatest
yes,
generation.
and I think that all of the people, my dad's friends who all served in World War II, very few of them talked about
My
what
dad
they
never-
saw,
yeah,
what they
my dad never talked
experienced.
about it.
I came across, my grandmother had it, and I was going through a box and I found a photo album, and it had my dad's name. It was a leather bound album. And my dad was in the South Pacific. And so it was, it listed, you know, where he had been. There were photos, and some of them were really horrific of bodies of dead Japanese soldiers. There were letters, because my grandma had saved letters that my dad had sent. They were all stuffed in, but of course, because they're going through the censor, you know, there are no details about where he was or what happened, but counting down the days to when he was coming back home and stuff like that. But I'm so glad I have it. But anyway, with this book, you know, it's so realistic. It's so honest in its depiction of what happened. And this is the experience of one person. And can you imagine that told millions of times over?
And when did you first come across this book? Was it fairly recently or?
It was probably about 12 years ago.
Mhm.
Well,
One of the things that struck me in this, and it just sort of struck me as I was reading it, and I wonder what everybody else thinks, is that it occurred to me that the people that survived both, you know, physically and mentally were the people that weren't afraid to take risks.
Mhm.
The risk takers made it either out alive or mentally, you know, whole, or they died. You know, they took the risk and they died. And our friend that started, I mean, he needed to start a factory making fabrics and he took the risk.
yeah,
And his in-laws were willing to put money behind it.
Behind
They
that,
took the risk.
yeah.
And then all the way through. But it also, so that was one thing that struck me. And along with the risk taking is a certain ability to, I don't want to say grasp reality, but like accurately read the handwriting on the wall.
Oh, that's a
Yeah,
good point.
yeah.
You know,
That's a
that
very good point
for the people that could, imagine, the problem with the Holocaust among many is that it's so unthinkable. It's unfathomable that
They
human-
wouldn't dare do that to us.
Well, and that gets back to the whole, what happened to the Jews throughout history. There were periods where they were persecuted, they were killed, and then things would settle down. And then it would happen again, and then things would settle down. And so when World War II occurred, and I am a history major, I've read so many books about the Holocaust and the history of World War II. They thought it would be okay. And I'm sure, Marcia, you can add to this more than I can. My parents aren't, my father wasn't a survivor. As I said, he's an American Jew. But they thought it would be okay. They thought it would be just, we'll go along, we'll follow the new rules. And it got worse and worse, and it was too late.
So it's the
was
boiling of a
Too
frog.
late.
Yeah.
They were caught in the web, whether they were the Franks who went from Germany to the Netherlands and settled in Amsterdam, or I have a very good friend whose in-laws were in Austria. They got out because the grandmother wrote a letter to Eleanor Roosevelt, and somehow it got to her. And she got them out.
Wow.
She didn't know them. There were all these quirky things that would happen, but the majority got caught in that web. They waited too long. They thought it would be, we're German. I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a professor, I'm whatever. It didn't matter who you were.
It's my country. You can't do this to me in my country. We have rights,
And then of
right?
course it spread to Poland and
Yeah.
Czechoslovakia and Hungary and then, Scandinavia and
But doesn't even it happen in this book where word trickles back about Auschwitz and what they're doing?
Yes, it
And-
does.
And they,
Yeah.
and so the flip side to what you're saying is that if I were Jewish, I would think, yeah, they
they
do
had
this
no-
to me
Mhm.
because for the last 1,000 years, they've been doing this to Jews.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't they? And,
you don't want to believe it's happening to your own country.
well, that,
Well, look what's happening here in the United
Right.
States. Look
Yeah.
what happened a year ago, January 6th.
Look at Ukraine.
Who would have ever thought?
right.
Who would have ever thought our capital would be attacked?
By our
So-
own people. I mean,
Yeah,
that's the worst.
And the German Jews were by Germans, by their neighbors.
Yeah, my great grandfather, fought in World War I. And well, I'm a veteran.
Yeah.
This isn't gonna happen to me, and it
Exactly.
certainly did.
What's interesting is there's something sort of similar happened in 1975 in a country called Cambodia.
You're right.
And when that was happening, it brought me back to the Holocaust. Let me quickly tell the story. The Khmer Rouge took over the country. And if you were educated, if you were professional or the like, you were dead. Their view of the ideal country was peasants. And the way it played out, and when I read about Artie's mother, I flashed back to a fellow I worked with. He was Cambodian, professor. His wife, Jeannie, professional. They were in Cambodia with their 5 kids. They got separated. They were going to meet. Khmer Rouge are coming in. They were going to meet at a certain spot. And I was kids. And the parents got there. And the 5 kids never did. They lost their 5 kids. And they came to this country. And then when things settled down, Jeannie and Sam went back to Cambodia, of course, named different country now, trying to find out what happened to their 5 kids. Couldn't find it.
Killing field.
The killing fields.
The killing fields. And then what happened, just like Artie's mother, Sam's wife, the mother of those 5 kids, had a total breakdown where she became totally dysfunctional. And so when I think of, when Sam would, he barely talk about this, but when he did talk a little bit about this, I was reading about the Khmer Rouge, brought me right back to the Holocaust. And the idea of sending kids off and never seeing them. And that's why when I read that in this book about the aunt who had the poison, boy, did it hit me. It hit really hard. In our last handful of minutes, let's take a look at a little, if we have just a little bit of this.
The video that,
Yeah, the interview with Art. And this is in response to what happened in Tennessee.
Oh, Amy Goodman.
And
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. As we continue our hour looking at banned books, we're joined now by the pioneering graphic novelist Art Spiegelman. In January, the McMinn County Board of Education in Athens, Tennessee, voted 10-0 to ban Art Spiegelman's Pulitzer Prize-winning graphic novel, Mouse, from its 8th grade language arts curriculum. Mouse tells the story of Art's parents who survived the Holocaust. In the graphic novel, he depicts Jewish characters as mice and Nazis as cats. Mouse is the German word for mouse. The school board claimed it banned the graphic novel because of profanity and nudity. Attention around the ban has resulted in Mouse shooting to the top of the bestseller lists, along with other works by Spiegelman, who is one of the most celebrated graphic novelists in the world. The ban comes amidst a wave of book bans pushed by right-wing groups across the United States. Art Spiegelman joins us now once again from his home in New York. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Art. It's great to have you with us, unfortunately, under these circumstances, though congratulations on what often happens is that when you have a book censored like this, your book Mouse, about Mouse and about Mauschwitz, right, Auschwitz, it shoots to the top of the bestseller list. You cannot get it in bookstores now. It is hard to get online. It'll take weeks or months to get. Can you talk about, first, your response to this banning, and then what Mouse is all about for people who don't know?
Well, my first reaction, and I'm still trying to get over it, is just bafflement. Because of the grounds on which it was banned. And my first response had been, well, gee, what are these Holocaust-denying crazies in Tennessee all about? And as I kind of beaded in on it more, I realized, no, they are not necessarily stupid Nazis. They're just stupid about what might work for their children in an educational context to let them understand what happened to my family. What was the second part of your question, Amy?
To tell us about Mouse, to tell us what happened to your parents.
Okay. My parents are both survivors of the death camps, Polish Jews, who hatched me when I was in Sweden while they were there as a displaced couple. In Sweden, they eventually came to America when I was about 3 years old. And so my father and mother didn't talk that much about this in a way that I could understand when I was growing up. My father just didn't want to talk about it at all, saying people don't want to hear such stories. And he was just building himself as best he could a life in America. My mother would let me know things, but in spurts that were absolutely terrifying and not with any context. And when I got older, after my mother had committed suicide in 1968 when I was 20, I just asked my father more about what happened, and it led to me being glued to hearing his story. It's one of the first times he and I could sit in a room together and not get into an argument. And here I was wrapped in finding out what the story was. It's as if he had been waiting for me to ask as an adult. And that led over a period of 13 years to trying to put this into book form. I never wanted. I never.
I'm sorry, Art
wanted-
Spiegelman. I wanted to ask you the one of the 10-0 voters at the McKinn County School Board. One of those school board members said of your book, "quote It shows people hanging. It shows them killing kids. Why does the educational system promote this kind of stuff? It's not wise or healthy." Your response to the concern, not so much about what actually happened, but someone actually telling what happened.
Well, let's see. I believe it's very misguided on their part to do this. And I think that sentence just leaked out of the school board members' mouth because they seem to be incredibly focused on a few bad words like damn, goddamn, which I always thought of as a kind of G-rated curse word. But also, what would leak out is how disturbed they were by some of the images from the past, though they're trying to focus on an image of what they called a nude woman. And I would prefer to have called what they had called a naked corpse of his mother in a bathtub. And I suppose it could have placated them if I redrew it with her wearing a bathrobe while in the bath, because there's a suggestion that she's naked, and naked seems like a more appropriate word for this than nude, which has sexual connotations. They tried to focus there, but what would keep leaking out, and then there's pictures of hanged mice and children being killed. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the story of what actually happened. But I would say that in some ways, I think it's just a displacement of their own anxieties. I believe that fewer books about the genocide of the Jews have been banned up to this point than the ones that Mr. Johnson was talking about gender and about race. But it's all under attack. And I would like to say that unlike Mr. Johnson's book, this book was never intended for children, so it added to my confusion, because I thought, like, I was making, after 13 years, a thing that didn't quite have the name graphic novels yet. I just thought I was making a long comic book for grown-ups that could be reread and worked with, because comics offer so much rich possibility for dealing with memory. When you read a comic, you read from left to right. Your eye is always going back to the past, the panel before, and inching toward the future, which are the panels after the one you're staring at. And it allows one to understand how close we are to the past, as I think William Faulkner said about the past. It's never really past. So I thought children should be protected, and I never intended it to be for young adults, children, whatever. But over the years, I've had to change my opinion. When I first got an award from the New York Public Library for Best Young Adult Book, I was annoyed, because I thought 13 years to make a book for adults, and here it is getting a young adult award. And I've had to modify my position over the years, because I've now met many, many children who've studied it in school, who found it on their own, who were given it by their parents. And it actually is received with a degree of real wisdom in their reading based on the people I've talked to, the young people. So I give up. It's comics are for whoever can understand them. Certainly the school board doesn't really. And I think one of the things that makes the book so powerful is exactly the part of the book they seemed to be especially concerned by, which has to do with not the past per se, but my relationship with my parents. That was my link to the past and my unorthodox way of dealing with them. Unorthodox, not just as a Jew, but in general, being part of the underground comics world of the 60s and 70s, taboo breaking seemed natural to me. I didn't realize that one taboo among all the others was being angry at one's parents if one's a child of survivors. At that time, they were just inventing the phrase second generation. And the obligation that most people in my situation inherited was don't upset your parents. They've already been through enough. My own anger was enough to overcome that taboo without thinking about it, because I was trying to just find out who they were, who I was, how I got to be here when the odds were against it, being born after the war by two people who were slated for genocidal murder. But I think it's that link of me talking with my parents that made the book better as a didactic tool than if I had intended it as such, because it allows somebody a window into finding what happened to the past among other people who also didn't experience it. And this was evidently very effective, because not everybody had a father who threw out their coat. I'm sorry, not everybody had a father who went through the Holocaust, but everybody had a parent, has a parent that did something equivalent to throwing out a favorite coat, because that was his way of taking control. As a result, when kids would come up to me and say, God, your conversations with your grandfather were so important for me to read. And I felt that was a real compliment, because I think at this point, I'm the one old enough to be their grandfather, and they just identified with me as the mouse masked character in the book.
Art, I wanted to go to your father in his own words, mouse-based.
And it continues on.
Oh, I have one quote. This is from an 8th grade student in middle school in McMinn County. When they banned the book and they came and they took them physically from the classrooms, she was determined to get a copy of it. And she got her mother to drive her the hour to Chattanooga to get the book. And I thought, this is really eloquent from a 13-year-old child. If they take away this book, what else are they going to take away from us? They're trying to hide history from us.
Well,
Smart kid.
yeah, well,
I wonder if I could just jump in here a little bit. I'm aware of there's a bookstore that I have visited in another area, and this person who owns it put a note on it and said, we're looking for suggestions for books. We have a new shelf, and it's going to be called historical fiction, but not about World War II and the Holocaust. They don't want, in other words, they've heard from people that do not want to read another book that has to do with either World War II or the Holocaust. I know we have huge amounts of material about it. And it got me thinking, is that the path that we're going to take? That are we going to, people going to reach a point where they're just saying, I just don't want to read about this anymore. I don't care what new research you have. I don't care what new book there is. Let's move on. And I thought a whole bookshelf now that they were looking for suggestions. They don't want any World War II or Holocaust material. And I'm like, they don't know anything. And I'm like, maybe that's a fright too, to think that.
sort of the sign of the times.
A sign of the times. And I think that's.
Well, it's frightening because genocide continues.
Yes.
We're seeing it in Ukraine right now.
Yeah.
I mean,
China.
people are being murdered and they're saying,
Piles.
yeah,
Piles.
and exactly. And I mean, I worry that the next generation is not going to, and I'm glad to hear that as a teacher, you were teaching this in your classroom, because I do worry about generations to come.
Yeah.
And because genocide continues.
Yeah.
And prejudice continues, whether we're Jews or we're Black or we're Asian.
Yeah.
That's the next, now that's the new grouping.
Right.
persecuted.
Or the things that have been declassified that now there's just finding out, and they're writing fantastic things I didn't know about the oceanographer in the Pacific, brand new book. I mean, this was, how do you think MacArthur already had those, knew where the reefs and things were, and it was the oceanographers that drew those pictures. I didn't know that story. I didn't know anything about that. And I'm thinking, okay, now they want these bookshelves that we don't want to know anything about it anymore, or we have
Yeah,
enough.
yeah.
And gee, it's.
And there's a lot coming out about World War II. We continue to have all
Mhm.
these new histories in
Yeah.
these everything,
Yeah.
and and it's coinciding with the greatest generation and the last Holocaust survivors
Yeah.
all dying
Yeah.
every day.
Mhm.
Soon there will be, and I'm a member of the Illinois Holocaust Museum, even though I live up here, I support it. And the programming they do is, if you're anywhere near, get on their website, because the programming they do is
It's
just,
unbelievable. Yeah.
yeah.
Can I just jump in with something?
The Illinois
May I?
Holocaust
From
Museum in
afar?
Illinois.
Oh,
Yeah.
Have you heard of this book
I
yet?
taught high school
Read
social
dangerously.
studies.
Mhm.
Read
Yeah.
dangerously. Yeah.
I'm halfway through it, and it's exactly what we're talking about. The title says, Read Dangerously, the Subversive Power of Literature in Troubled Times. And it is expressly speaking to the banned books that are appearing in more detail, in more quantity than what we've had in the past. And the fact that if you go back to, she speaks, this author who's Iranian speaks to, when there was a fatwa against Salman Rushdie,
Mhm.
and we in America have enjoyed the freedom of expression, so to speak, and it's increasing now where freedom of expression is being quashed. And her main point, I guess, in her introduction is that our democracy depends on us engaging with those who do not agree with us. It depends on that. And if we keep whitewashing and erasing things that are just too unpleasant to talk about or to revisit, it leads the way, unfortunately, for totalitarianism.
On the other hand, I see more and more multicultural books coming out all the time. We're reading
Yes,
more books from other countries. and
Exactly.
translating. But that's more of a sort of underground thing going on.
Yeah.
If I can just interject, if you have the opportunity or can find it, there is a documentary called Big Sonia. Big Sonia is about this tall. Anyway, she's a Holocaust survivor. I went to school with her children.
Oh,
It's an amazing story. And
What was it again, Marcia?
Big Sonia.
Big Sonia.
And I know some PBS stations have shown it it's actually an hour and a half, and I think they had to edit it, which is too bad. But I don't know if any streaming service has it, but and her granddaughter, it was the director of this, and it uses animation as well as live interviews and following her around, but she's a very dynamic person. She's got to be at least 96 now,
wow.
and she still travels to tell her story, which is so important.
It looks like it might be in the library catalog. So,
Yep, that's it.
So it's there.
yeah,
So it's available.
so check out,
Well,
yes. Good.
Yeah, it's great.
I think we're coming to an end here. I see people backing up, and
There's only one copy, so we'll have to share. But it may be on YouTube or something. A lot of
Yeah.
PBS shows are on.
Oh, we could have a movie night.
Yeah.
really nice. Well, everyone, thanks for everyone's insight.
This was great.
This is really educational for all
Thanks
of
for
us.
doing this.
Yeah, yeah. I'm worn out.
Yeah.
with all
I'm
the
worn out.
educators. I mean,
I need you to, we need another hour.
are
have
we
so many
worried
thoughts.
that this is coming to Wisconsin? And if it is, what can we do? What do we take from this discussion? I mean, we all seem to be on the same level and that.
I think we need to continue to be engaged and to speak out.
That's just the word vigilant
Vigilant,
is what we were
yes.
gonna say.
Yes.
Just, you got me before. Yeah.
Yeah.
This whole critical race theory is all wrapped up in this too, and what they're pushing, and they're, oh, we're tired of this, just let it go, it happened, it's done, it's like, oh.
Yeah.
The Native Americans, we
Yeah.
could go on about all kinds of things that are just put under the rug. When I
Yeah.
couldn't teach Columbus because it wasn't part of the real thing, I got in deep trouble, and I taught elementary. And we don't scaffold.
Where
our
was that?
learners.
I'm curious.
Sebastopol.
Okay.
We don't scaffold our learners
No.
either, and we don't provide the support that they need early on. So when they get to Mouse,
Yeah.
they're ready for some of it. Even though I thought I scaffolded my sons for the trip to Washington DC, when we walked into the Holocaust Museum, I fainted. I was so grieved.
Mhm.
I still am. I put Mouse down and didn't read it for 5 years because I couldn't. It just brought back the sadness, and I was ashamed. I was ashamed that my people did this to those people.
Yeah.
You have to scaffold the adults too.
Oh, God, yeah.
They're living with
Yeah.
blinders on, and they're living with rose glasses, and seriously?
And then they're teaching
Take-
their children.
Exactly.
And
So we're not.
Could I add something quickly? If you're interested in controversial books aimed at teenagers, June 20th, we're doing a book talk with the authors of a book called We Will Always Be Here. And that's
June 20th.
yeah, it's a book written for teenagers about being LGBT.
TQIA+.
Yes, and what are we
Yes.
doing? Talking about
And
Florida.
it's
don't-
published by
Yeah.
the Wisconsin State Historical Society.
Wow.
And the authors will be there.
Well, it's all on Zoom though, because they're not in the area.
Yeah.
And we'll also have Deb Anderson, who's the director of the UWGB Area Research Center, join us.
This
So
is
that should be an
June
interesting
20th.
talk.
June 20th.
Yeah,
And
June
in the
20th.
evening, Laura?
No, I
believe-
think it's in the day.
Is it?
Yeah, during the daytime. It's on our calendar.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on the library calendar. I reached out to the local schools asking for them to promote it to their GSAs. And
Yeah, because school will be out by then.
yes, but to talk to any of, I know Sevastopol has a pretty active Gay Straight Alliance at their school. And so to let the kids know, so I sent it out to the
Monday.
school librarians
Yes.
to ask them to let the kids know. And also, I got in touch with Sandy Brown. So the local
She's super.
have
She is
been
just super.
Yeah.
have been notified so that we hope that we get a broad reach.
Well, we're gonna have the Gay Pride Parade the first week of June up in Sister Bay.
There we
Anyone
go.
wants to join.
Mhm.
The last year that I taught before I retired, I had my first transgender student. And they called a big meeting on the first day of all the teachers that were going to teach this child that's transgender, because there were going to be issues that the administration dealt with them. And so here you go. They've given her or him, depending upon how you look at it, he was a he last year, but now he wants the female pronoun,
Right.
she. And so please always refer to her as her, okay, not
Right,
him.
correct.
And and in terms of the bathroom, we've given her a key to the faculty bathrooms
Oh.
because they're individual. And I thought, gosh, that's
Oh,
pretty
that's cool.
smart. I mean,
Yeah,
takes care of the
Yeah.
problem temporarily anyway, right? And removes it from what. So anyway, there are a few more things that they had in mind. So one day, I don't know, a couple months in, this child stops at my desk on the way out and says, I did not appreciate you referring to me with the masculine pronoun. And I looked at him her. And I said, but I didn't, let me think, I didn't refer to you at all. You didn't raise your hand or you didn't ask any questions or I didn't call on you. So when did I do this? It doesn't matter. I just didn't appreciate it. And I thought, you know what, to myself, you're dealing with a teenager. Just remember that.
First and foremost.
There's a point that they feel, you know, if they feel they have a point to make, they're gonna make it. Whether, you know, I mean, that's just it. So I said, well, I will do my very best. That's all I can promise you, you know, to in the future, keep in mind your preference, okay? Because I respect it and, you know, I want you to be in an environment that you feel comfortable. But the other thing I wanted to just say was that I was given global studies to teach, and 9 weeks of that was world religions. And over again, kids would ask me, why do people hate Jews?
It's a good question.
Yeah, they had no idea. I mean, you know, we studied the Holocaust, we studied,
learners.
you know, right, well.
Build
and-
background knowledge, I mean, it's.
And, you know, it's, and you're just sitting there and you're thinking, I mean, for me, it was.
I'm just glad they asked.
Well, I'm glad they asked too, and I would, you know, and it's sort of like, I can give you, you know, I've heard different reasons from different people and I.
We could give you a whole class. couldn't we? Yeah, I mean,
I would appreciate that, and that would be a very cool, you know, class to take. Because if you look at the teachings of Judaism, it's a beautiful religion, you know, and that's how I was teaching it. You know, so, you know, the logical thing was, you know, if this is so beautiful and such a thoughtful religion, why do people hate them? Why, you know, and I'm like, oh, there's, you know, there are pitfalls to being a teacher and.
Yes.
That's for sure.
Yeah, and sometimes we just step right into it.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
But again, it's curious. And if you don't teach them while they're in school.
well, they're getting it at home. Like I said, think of South Pacific, the young
Yeah.
man in that song.
Yes.
Well, you know, I gotta tell you,
You have to be carefully taught.
when I
Exactly.
first
Exactly.
did my curriculum for that 9 weeks, I shorted Christianity and the theory that they already knew all about that because they were mostly Catholic. I mean, I mostly Hispanic. And I was wrong. You know, they didn't know much about Christianity at all, oddly enough. And I'm like, look, you guys, stop. I watch Blue Bloods. Anybody here watch Blue Bloods?
Yes, I love
Right,
that
right.
show.
Right. I
Well,
said,
Friday night.
right, Friday, right. I said, you know, they start every family dinner with Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. What does that mean? You do that? Yeah, we do that.
And why are they doing it?
Why are
Yeah.
you doing it?
But you
I
don't know
don't
why you're
know.
doing it.
I don't know, Miss Brown, but you forgot this.
I bet they don't realize
What
that.
that is either.
Yeah,
No,
but they also don't realize Jesus was a Jew.
well, that's,
Yeah.
you know.
So
Yeah.
we're getting even more complicated.
Now that, yeah, that was.
Right,
Have
right,
more
right.
discussion.
So
Can I?
that's what we should all be writing the school board of Tennessee. You need to teach your kids about world religions. Teach it honestly and fairly. Yeah, I mean, do you know what I mean? Like,
It'll never get on the curriculum.
No, that,
It would never get on the curriculum.
don't hold your breath on that one.
Can I tell you about a fiction story that came out last year? The title of the book is A Ceiling Made of Eggshells, and I read it as part of, it's Gail Carson Levine. And she is Gail Carson Levine, and she's wonderful. And she writes a lot of historical fiction. And the book Ceiling Made of Eggshells takes place in 1492 in Spain. Okay, so this is a fantastic book. Like I said, I read it out loud and recorded it for the kids. So it's out there, me reading the whole thing. So I got a big mouthful of it where, you know, skimming it along as you're reading it is different from reading it out loud. And this is a story of a Jewish girl in a ghetto. And her family and her father was a diplomat. And this is the year that the Spanish drove the Jews out of Spain. And so, yeah, it takes place in 1492 in Spain. And this is the story of the people that her family came from. So her family was driven out of Spain and went to Turkey, and went from Turkey to the United States. And this was the Levine side. So she did not realize that there were Jews on both sides of her family until fairly late on. And, you know, the other side came straight from Spain to Mexico and were people who had been forced to convert. And so she conversos, yes. So her family were conversos who had been in Spain and into Mexico. And she did not realize that. And she has written a book about the conversos as well. So
Have to look into
What's
that.
her name again?
Gail Carson Levine. Levine.
Well, thank you all again for.
This was very
Thank you.
great.
Yeah.
It was.
Good to see you.
And I hope to put this on YouTube, so if you want to let other people
Oh
share.
my God,
Okay.
we're all gonna.
It'll take a little while.
Will you max out the part? I never said what school.
I should have.